Discipline begins the moment you understand that feelings are unreliable leaders. Emotions fluctuate with sleep, environment, stress, and circumstances, while standards remain fixed when deliberately chosen. When feelings are allowed to decide actions, consistency collapses, and because motivation comes and goes without warning. Discipline requires a shift from reacting emotionally to operating intentionally, where actions are guided by pre-established rules rather than temporary internal states. Standards act as non-negotiable boundaries that define acceptable behavior regardless of mood. When standards are clear, decision-making becomes automatic because the choice has already been made. There is no inner debate about whether to show up, do the work, or follow through, since the standard already demands it. This removes hesitation and replaces uncertainty with clarity. Emotions are valuable as signals but dangerous as commanders. They can indicate fatigue, stress, or resistance, but they should never be given authority over execution. Allowing emotions to dictate behavior trains the mind to seek comfort instead of progress. Discipline grows stronger when actions continue despite emotional resistance. A decision-based approach to discipline removes dependency on external inspiration. Waiting to feel ready creates delay, and delay compounds into stagnation. When discipline is rooted in decision, action becomes consistent even on difficult days. This consistency builds momentum, and momentum reduces the emotional weight of effort. Standards elevate performance by eliminating exceptions. Once exceptions are allowed, discipline weakens because the mind learns that rules are flexible. Strong standards do not negotiate with discomfort or fatigue. They demand adherence even when conditions are imperfect, reinforcing self-trust and personal integrity. Living by standards shifts identity from reactive to intentional. Instead of seeing oneself as someone who tries when motivated, a person becomes someone who acts because it is required. Identity-driven behavior creates stability, and stability creates long-term results. Over time, discipline becomes less effortful because it aligns with self-perception. Emotional leadership often prioritizes short-term relief over long-term outcomes. Standards reverse this pattern by prioritizing future benefits over present comfort. This trade-off is what separates disciplined individuals from inconsistent ones. The ability to delay gratification is strengthened each time standards override emotion. When standards lead, excuses lose their power. Circumstances no longer determine effort, and obstacles become irrelevant to execution. Discipline becomes predictable because it no longer depends on how one feels in the moment. Predictability in action leads to reliability in results. Standards also simplify life by reducing mental clutter. Fewer decisions are needed when behavior is already defined. This conserves mental energy and increases focus, allowing effort to be directed toward progress rather than internal debate. Discipline thrives in environments where clarity replaces chaos. Choosing standards over emotions is an act of self-leadership that compounds daily. Each disciplined action reinforces authority over the self and weakens emotional impulsivity. Over time, this creates a stable foundation where progress is inevitable and personal control becomes the norm. Systems and structure create discipline. When willpower fails, expand it and don't add any ending sentence and make it lengthy in 10 paragraphs without heading and conclusion. Willpower is a limited resource that fluctuates based on energy, stress, and emotional state. Relying on it alone creates inconsistency because there will always be days when motivation is low and resistance is high. Systems remove the need for constant internal battles by deciding in advance what action must be taken. When structure is in place, progress continues even when desire disappears. A system is simply a repeatable process that produces a predictable outcome. When daily actions are designed intentionally, discipline becomes automatic rather than forced. Instead of asking whether to act, the system answers that question on your behalf. This reduces friction and eliminates the mental fatigue that comes from repeated decision-making. Structure creates boundaries that protect focus and energy. Clear schedules, defined routines, and predetermined priorities reduce exposure to distraction. When time and attention are assigned with intention, there is less opportunity for procrastination to take control. Discipline strengthens when chaos is replaced with order. Systems also remove emotional bias from execution. When tasks are scheduled and sequenced, emotions no longer determine whether they get done. Action becomes a matter of compliance rather than negotiation. This consistency builds trust in oneself and reinforces reliability over time. Environment is a powerful component of structure. What is visible, accessible, and convenient strongly influences behavior. By designing surroundings to support productive habits, discipline becomes easier to maintain. When the environment works in favor of goals, willpower is preserved instead of depleted. Structure transforms large goals into manageable steps. Instead of being overwhelmed by the size of an objective, systems break progress into daily actions. This creates momentum and reduces avoidance, making discipline sustainable rather than exhausting. Small steps repeated consistently outperform intense effort applied sporadically. Accountability systems strengthen discipline by introducing external reinforcement, tracking progress, Setting deadlines and measuring outcomes create feedback loops that guide behavior. When performance is visible, avoidance becomes harder and commitment becomes stronger. Discipline grows when actions are monitored rather than assumed. Systems create resilience during periods of stress or uncertainty. When life becomes unpredictable, structured routines provide stability. Even minimal adherence to a system maintains forward motion. This prevents complete collapse during difficult seasons and allows recovery without starting over. Structure also protects discipline from overthinking. When tasks are clearly defined, there is less room for doubt or hesitation. Action becomes straightforward and execution becomes faster. Discipline thrives when clarity replaces ambiguity. The power of systems lies in their ability to function regardless of internal state. Motivation may fade and emotions may fluctuate, but structure remains steady. Over time, consistent execution reshapes behavior and identity, making discipline the natural result of an ordered life. Behavior is the visible expression of identity. What a person repeatedly does is a reflection of how they see themselves, not what they claim to want. When identity is unclear or borrowed from circumstances, actions become inconsistent and reactive. Discipline becomes difficult because behavior lacks a stable internal reference point. Deciding who you are creates a fixed framework for action. When identity is chosen intentionally, decisions no longer require excessive thought. The question shifts from what feels easiest to what aligns with the chosen self-image. This alignment simplifies execution and reduces internal conflict. People act in ways that confirm their self-perception. If someone identifies as inconsistent, they unconsciously seek behaviors that reinforce that belief. When identity changes, behavior follows naturally because the mind works to stay congruent with self-image. Discipline strengthens when actions serve to validate a higher identity. Identity-based discipline removes dependence on external validation. Actions are no longer driven by praise, pressure, or comparison. The standard becomes internal and self-directed. This internal authority produces consistency even when no one is watching. When identity leads, habits form faster. Repeated actions are no longer seen as effortful tasks, but as expressions of who one is. This reduces resistance and increases follow-through. Discipline becomes an extension of identity rather than an act of force. Deciding who you are also establishes clear boundaries. Certain behaviors become unacceptable because they conflict with identity. This eliminates temptation at the decision level rather than at the moment of action. Discipline becomes preventative rather than reactive. Identity creates long-term stability because it is not dependent on circumstances. External conditions may change, but identity remains constant. This stability allows disciplined behavior to continue through stress, failure, and uncertainty. Consistency is preserved because it is rooted internally. Language reinforces identity and shapes behavior. The words used internally and externally influence how actions are justified or avoided. Identity-driven language strengthens discipline by framing actions as obligations rather than options. This reinforces commitment at the psychological level. As identity solidifies, behavior becomes predictable. Predictable behavior produces predictable outcomes. This reliability builds confidence and self-trust, which further reinforces disciplined action. The cycle strengthens with repetition. Choosing identity is an act of leadership over the self. Each aligned action strengthens the chosen identity and weakens competing versions. Over time, behavior no longer requires motivation because it is simply the natural expression of who has been decided to be. Small actions appear insignificant in isolation, which is why they are often underestimated or ignored. Their true power lies not in their size, but in their consistency. When repeated daily, even the simplest actions begin to accumulate momentum that is invisible at first. Progress becomes subtle before it becomes obvious. Consistency removes the pressure of perfection. Instead of waiting for ideal conditions or maximum effort, small actions allow movement to begin immediately. This reduces resistance and lowers the emotional barrier to starting. Action becomes approachable rather than overwhelming. The compounding effect works quietly and relentlessly. Each small action builds upon the last, creating exponential growth over time. What feels like slow progress in the beginning eventually turns into acceleration. This process rewards patience and persistence rather than intensity. Small actions train discipline without exhausting willpower. They are easier to repeat, which increases the likelihood of long-term adherence. Over time, repetition strengthens habits and reshapes behavior. Discipline becomes sustainable because it does not demand constant strain. Consistency creates identity reinforcement. When actions are performed daily, they send a signal to the mind about who one is becoming. This strengthens self-belief and internal alignment. The identity formed through repetition supports continued disciplined behavior. Small actions also reduce fear and procrastination. Large goals often trigger avoidance because they feel too demanding. Breaking progress into small steps makes movement inevitable. Momentum builds naturally as each step leads into the next. Compounding rewards patience more than talent. Those who commit to small daily actions often outperform those who rely on bursts of effort. The steady approach outlasts motivation and survives periods of low energy. Over time, the gap between consistency and inconsistency becomes significant. Small actions create predictability and progress. When effort is applied regularly, results become measurable and reliable. This predictability builds confidence and reduces uncertainty. Confidence further increases willingness to continue. Consistency protects progress during difficult periods. Even minimal action maintains continuity and prevents regression. This keeps growth intact when circumstances are unfavorable. Stability is preserved through repetition rather than intensity. Unstoppable results are not created by dramatic moments, but by ordinary actions repeated without interruption. The power of consistency lies in its refusal to stop. What begins as a minor commitment evolves into a force that is difficult to disrupt and impossible to ignore. Pain is unavoidable in every meaningful pursuit. The difference is not whether pain will be experienced, but which form it will take. Discipline introduces discomfort early, demanding effort, restraint, and consistency. Regret delays pain, allowing comfort now while storing consequences for later. The pain of discipline is immediate and controlled. It shows up as early mornings, difficult choices, and repeated effort when rest would be easier. This pain has a purpose and a direction. It is temporary and decreases as strength, skill, and confidence increase. The pain of regret is passive but heavier. It appears as missed opportunities, unrealized potential, and the awareness of what could have been done differently. Unlike discipline, regret offers no growth or reward. It lingers and compounds over time. Discipline asks for sacrifice in the present to protect the future. It requires saying no to short-term pleasure in exchange for long-term freedom. This trade-off strengthens self-respect and builds internal trust. Each discipline enforces control over one's direction. Regret thrives in inaction and avoidance. When choices are postponed or responsibility is ignored, regret quietly takes root. It grows stronger with every excuse and every delay. Eventually, it becomes a constant reminder of neglected responsibility. The pain of discipline builds resilience. Facing controlled discomfort trains the mind to tolerate effort and resist temptation. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes normal. Capacity expands and effort feels lighter as strength increases. Regret weakens confidence and clarity. It clouds decision-making with doubt and self-criticism. Instead of moving forward, energy is spent replaying the past. Progress becomes harder because attention is divided between what is and what should have been. Discipline creates momentum that reduces future pain. Each act of effort makes the next one easier. Structure replaces chaos and clarity replaces confusion. This forward motion protects against the stagnation that leads to regret. Choosing discipline is an act of self-respect. It signals that future outcomes matter more than present comfort. This choice reinforces identity and strengthens personal standards. Over time, discipline becomes a source of pride rather than struggle. Every day presents a choice between temporary discomfort and lasting dissatisfaction. One pain leads to growth and freedom. The other leads to limitation and reflection. The direction chosen determines whether effort becomes an investment or regret becomes the cost. Discipline begins with the ability to separate emotion from action. Motivation is inconsistent by nature, rising and falling without warning. When action depends on feeling inspired, progress becomes unpredictable. Emotional control allows execution to continue regardless of internal fluctuations. Emotions are powerful but temporary states. They reflect comfort, fear, fatigue, or excitement, none of which are reliable indicators of what should be done. Allowing emotions to dictate behavior creates inconsistency and delay. Discipline requires acknowledging emotions without obeying them. Executing without motivation requires clarity of priority. When objectives are clearly defined, action becomes a responsibility rather than a choice. Responsibility does not wait for emotional agreement. This shift transforms discipline from a struggle into an obligation. Emotional control is developed through repeated exposure to discomfort. Each time action is taken despite resistance, tolerance increases. What once felt heavy becomes manageable. Over time, emotional resistance weakens as discipline strengthens. Motivation often follows action rather than preceding it. Waiting to feel motivated creates stagnation. Starting the task, even imperfectly, generates momentum that fuels further effort. Discipline initiates movement when motivation is absent. Executing without motivation builds self-trust. Keeping commitments regardless of mood reinforces reliability. This consistency strengthens confidence and reduces self-doubt. Emotional stability grows as actions become dependable. Emotional control also prevents impulsive decision-making. Acting on emotion often prioritizes comfort over consequence. Discipline slows this reaction and restores intention. Controlled execution aligns behavior with long-term goals rather than short-term relief. Structure supports emotional control by reducing decision fatigue. When routines are predetermined, execution requires less emotional energy. This preserves focus and limits opportunities for avoidance. Discipline becomes efficient rather than exhausting. Executing without motivation protects progress during difficult periods. Stress, fatigue, and uncertainty no longer derail effort. Consistency is maintained even when conditions are unfavorable. This resilience separates disciplined individuals from reactive ones. Discipline as emotional control transforms effort into identity. Action becomes independent